The secret hidden in the Lighthouse journal. Mrs. Weatherby came in so quickly that the tea upon the tray shivered in its cups, and the little domestic accident, trivial in itself, altered the temper of the room as surely as though a window had been flung open upon a gale. "The Lighthouse journal, sir," she said, looking not at Sir Reginald Farn but at the carpet immediately before him. "It is not in the hall cabinet." There had been 6 people in the drawing-room besides Hercule Poirot, and every one of them betrayed some fragment of the self at that moment. Lucy Farn gave a sharp intake of breath and then smiled, as young women smile when they fear that they have shown too much. Felix Trent, Sir Reginald's nephew, set down his cup with unnecessary care, though a line of color leaped into his cheek. Clara Blythe, the secretary, straightened in her chair as if a command had sounded. Dr. Stephen Ware blinked and lifted his brows with professional mildness. Hugh Denham, who stood by the window, turned his head slowly. It was the deliberation of the movement, rather than any abruptness, that made it singular. Sylvia Farn alone remained composed, her fingers resting upon the silver sugar tongs with a softness almost studied. Sir Reginald said, "Not in the cabinet?" His voice was never loud. It had the chill authority of a man long accustomed to obedience. Mrs. Weatherby colored. "I locked it there after luncheon, sir. Mr. Denham himself saw me do it," he said at once. "Quite right. I did." Sir Reginald's pale eyes went from face to face. "Then one of this household has taken leave of order." The words had a curious effect. Felix gave a faint laugh. Lucy moved toward her stepmother, then checked herself. Poirot, who had been invited down from the Marine Hotel for tea because Lady Sylvia had declared that a celebrated man improved the dullest coast, observed that the news of a missing old book had not produced mere annoyance. It had introduced fear. "It is an old keeper's log," said Dr. Ware, with a shrug meant to lighten the matter. "Surely it cannot have gone far." Sir Reginald turned to him. "It can go precisely as far as somebody's conscience carries it." He rose. He was a spare man, exceedingly upright, with white hair brushed back from a brow that seemed carved for severity. "Remain here. I shall settle this myself," Lucy said quickly. "Father!" But he had already gone out through the arch into the library beyond the hall. For an instant no one spoke. The room, so lately civilized by porcelain and lamplight, appeared to have become a waiting chamber in which private apprehensions took on form. Felix broke it. "My uncle has chosen to invest a parish relic with the importance of a state paper." "Felix!" Sylvia did not rebuke, she merely pronounced his name, and that was enough. He flushed. "My dear Sylvia, I am only saying what everyone knows." "Not everyone," said Clara Blythe. It was the first time she had spoken, and her tone carried an odd dryness. Sir Reginald had reason to value it. Poirot glanced at her. A secretary sees much and often tells nothing. Miss Blythe had an exact, almost severe prettiness, but there was fatigue in the corners of her mouth, as though self-command cost her more than she would have wished to admit. Hugh Denham came a step nearer the hearth. "Mr. Pellow kept that journal for 30 years, he said. My father trusted Sir Reginald with it because Sir Reginald promised it would be treated properly." "Your father trusted too many people," said Felix lightly. Hugh's eyes rested on him. "That may be." The sentence was civil. Yet beneath it there was something hard and ancient, like rock below water. From the library came the sound of a chair moved sharply back. Lucy started and half ran to the door. She was a lovely girl, But her beauty had the unfinished quality of youth. One felt in her the tremor between obedience and revolt. As she reached the threshold, there came not a cry, but a short, breathless exclamation, stifled almost before it was born. Then she said, in a voice that had gone flat, "Mother, come!" They found Sir Reginald on the far side of the writing table, collapsed sideways against it so that one arm hung down and the fingers touched the carpet. The Venetian paper knife, with its twisted colored handle, stood out obscenely from the dark of his coat. On the floor beside him lay the Lighthouse journal, fallen open, its cracked leather cover bent under the weight of his shoulder. One lamp burned upon the desk. The curtains were not yet drawn, and the late gold of the sea entered in a narrow strip across the books. Sylvia did not scream. She went very white and put out a hand to the edge of the table. Dr. Ware was at Sir Reginald's side in an instant, kneeling, his competent fingers already seeking the futile assurances of medicine. "He is dead," he said. There was a little silence then, not dramatic, but dreadful in its restraint. Poirot saw Lucy looking not at her father but at the journal. He saw Clara's eyes flick toward the mantel. He saw Felix, whose face had gone suddenly old, pass his tongue over dry lips before saying in a whisper, "Good God!" Hugh Denham had not moved at all. Poirot approached the body delicately. "No one, if you please, touches anything?" Dr. Ware glanced up. "Quite right." Upon the blotter on the desk lay a sheet of notepaper bearing only 3 words in Sir Reginald's minute, controlled hand, "Before I speak." The sentence ended there. An inkstand stood uncapped. One drawer of the desk had been pulled open and pushed shut again so hastily that it remained a fraction ajar. Mrs. Weatherby, who had followed them and now stood in the doorway clasping her apron, began to murmur that the police must be sent for. "Yes," said Poirot. "At once. And no one leaves the house. Do you imagine," Felix said harshly, "that one of us?" Poirot turned his head. "I imagine nothing, monsieur. I observe." The journal had fallen open near the middle. Several leaves were crumpled where Sir Reginald's hand must have clutched them. One page had been torn cleanly away close to the binding, though the absence was not immediately obvious until Poirot, stooping, saw the ragged thread left behind. A thing removed in haste does not become less eloquent because it is small. Lucy whispered, "He meant to tell us something." Sylvia's hand came down upon her shoulder. "Not now." Yet her own voice failed slightly on the last word. Poirot moved nearer the fireplace. Upon the black marble mantel stood a silver model of the St. Aldhelm lighthouse, exquisitely made, its tiny galleries and lantern panes chased with almost loving precision. It was set a little askew upon its ebony base, so little that a casual eye might never have detected it. In that room, however, where every object obeyed an exact symmetry proper to Sir Reginald's habits, the small disorder had the force of a confession. Behind him Felix said, "What on earth was in that thing?" meaning the journal now, not the model. Clara Blythe answered before anyone else could speak. "Perhaps," she said, and the dryness had left her voice, "something that somebody could not bear to hear read aloud." Poirot straightened himself. The sea light had narrowed further. In the hall a clock began to strike, and each measured note seemed to mark not time but the tightening of a net no one yet saw. "Nobody could bear it," he said softly. "Or one person could not. There is a difference. We shall find which. Section 1 has ended." "Which?" repeated Felix Trent, and the word came out with a brittle impatience that seemed less like courage than an attempt to hear something ordinary in a room where ordinary sounds had ceased to exist. Poirot gave him no answer. He was looking at Lady Sylvia, who had removed her hand from Lucy's shoulder and now stood with the stillness of a woman who knows that movement may betray her. In certain natures composure is strength, in others it is the final defense of terror. Poirot did not yet decide to which class hers belonged. Mrs. Weatherby, recovering herself by devotion to procedure, dispatched a footman for the police and another for the village constable. Dr. Ware rose from beside the body and drew the curtains, not from sentiment but because he could not endure the strip of sea light any longer. It was Clara Blythe who, with a secretary's instinct for practical necessities, found a screen and set it between the desk and the door. The action was humane, yet Poirot observed that she did not once look directly at the dead man while she performed it. "No one leaves this room, or the next," he said. "And before the inspector arrives, perhaps each of you will tell me one thing only. When you last saw Sir Reginald alive?" 3 minutes ago," said Felix. "He left the drawing-room." 2 or 3, said Hugh Denham. Lucy whispered. "The same," Clara said. "He asked me after luncheon whether the journal had been dusted. That was the last time I spoke with him. But I saw him go out just now," Lady Sylvia added quietly. "He crossed the hall with the key basket in his hand." Poirot turned. "The key basket?" She seemed to regret the precision at once. "I may be mistaken. Something metallic, perhaps. I was not attending." "That is not like you, Sylvia," said Felix with sudden roughness. She looked at him, and for the first time a faint hardness entered her expression. "No, it is not. There are moments when a family betrayal is not an accusation but a familiarity." Poirot noted it. The village constable arrived red-faced and important, followed presently by Inspector Kell from Truro, a large fair man whose manner suggested caution rather than brilliance. He heard Dr. Ware's brief account, looked at Poirot with recognition and relief, and bent to the body. "Stab wound to the chest," he said. "No signs of struggle worth the name." "Because Sir Reginald rose to someone he knew," said Poirot. Kell glanced at the paper on the desk. "Before I speak. That means something." "It means," said Felix, "that my uncle was about to make a damned performance of some secret, and somebody stopped him." Lucy gave a little shiver. "Felix! Oh, spare me the proprieties. He has been threatening disclosures for a week." "About money?" asked the inspector. Felix smiled without mirth. "That would have concerned me, no doubt. You may put me first upon your neat official list." "I had debts." My uncle had a fondness for reminding me that he knew it. There was relief in the frankness. A man sometimes confesses the lesser ugliness in order to conceal another, but sometimes also because he is tired of pretending. Poirot saw Clara's face alter at Felix's words. It was the smallest thing, merely a tightening near the eyes, yet one felt behind it an involuntary compassion. Inspector Kell examined the fallen journal. Between the crabbed weather entries and accounts of oil and wick there yawned the rough absence of a removed leaf. He touched the edge lightly. "Torn out after binding," he said. "Recently?" asked Poirot. "Could be today, could be years ago." Poirot's hand moved to the blotter. "And this desk drawer, open, shut, but not quite. It was searched, perhaps." Kell drew it out. Inside lay a bundle of old letters tied with black ribbon, a checkbook, and a magnifying glass. Nothing appeared disturbed except that the ribbon had slipped partly free, as though impatient fingers had thrust it back without care. Lucy turned away. "I cannot bear this room." "No," said Lady Sylvia. "You shall stay in it." The sentence might have been cruel. It was not. Poirot heard in it the desperate determination of a woman who knows that if weakness begins, it will not end. He moved slowly along the library wall. The room was arranged with that severe order which speaks not of taste but of authority. Books of equal height had been grouped together. On the writing table every implement possessed its assigned place. The fire had burned low and neat, its ash unbroken. Upon the mantel the silver model lighthouse caught the lamplight and returned it coldly. Once more Poirot saw that the tiny lantern at the top did not sit true to its base. A quarter turn, perhaps less, but Sir Reginald's eye would have suffered from it as another man's might suffer from a pebble in the shoe. "Did Sir Reginald often handle that?" he asked suddenly. Clara answered at once. "Never. He disliked ornaments touched." "But he would have noticed if it stood crooked?" She hesitated. "Certainly. It was Hugh Denham who said, 'My father made that model for him. Sir Reginald used to straighten it if the maids so much as shifted the dust beneath it.'" Inspector Kell looked up sharply. "And was it crooked before tea?" No one answered at once. Then Felix said, "I don't collect household trivia." Lucy, after a moment, murmured, "I think it was straight." Lady Sylvia did not speak. Poirot saw that she was looking not at the model, but at Hugh Denham. The look lasted only a second. Its meaning, however, was not indifference, it was measurement. Kell asked for the servants, and Mrs. Weatherby provided them one by one. The footman had seen Sir Reginald enter the library alone. The maid Ellen had been in the morning room and heard nothing. No stranger had called. The cabinet in the hall, where the journal had been displayed for Sir Reginald's private satisfaction all afternoon, showed no mark of force. "Then someone had the key," said the inspector. "Or knew where it was kept," said Poirot. Sir Reginald's waistcoat pocket yielded no cabinet key. Nor was it upon the floor. Kell frowned. "Miss Blythe, you kept his household lists. Where would he leave a small cabinet key?" "Not leave it," she said. "Conceal it. He trusted hiding places more than people." "In the desk?" "No." She stopped there. Poirot watched her. An honest refusal has a different contour from an evasive one. Miss Blythe's silence was not the one and not quite the other. It was the silence of a woman who had made herself servant to order, and found that order could become complicity. Dr. Ware said mildly, "Surely this is all secondary until we know what the missing leaf contained." "On the contrary," said Poirot, "it is the same question approached from another side. One does not take the journal, return the journal, remove the leaf, and kill Sir Reginald without purpose. The purpose lies in what was read, or what would have been read." Kell nodded. "We shall search the house from roof to cellar." Poirot's gaze returned to the model lighthouse. "Begin, if you please, with the object that offends the dead man's habits. Afterwards we shall ask who among the living understood them well enough to use them." Section 2 has ended. Inspector Kell, who possessed the good sense to be neither offended nor overawed, crossed at once to the mantel and lifted the silver lighthouse in both hands. It was heavier than it looked. The ebony base turned slightly under his fingers. Then, with a small reluctant movement, the lantern section settled into place, as though some thread within had caught at last. He set it down, and examined it more narrowly. "There's a screw fitting," he said. "Recently worked, I should say." "Open it," said Poirot. Kell did so. The base came away and disclosed a hollow no bigger than a snuff-box. Within lay a single brass key and a faint dust of black grit. "The cabinet key," said Clara Blythe. She had spoken too quickly. She knew it herself. A flush rose under the disciplined pallor of her face. "You were aware of the hiding place, then?" asked the inspector. "Yes. Sir Reginald once told me I should understand his filing system better if I understood his distrust of mankind." Felix gave an ugly laugh. "That sounds like him." Poirot took the key between finger and thumb. There was grease upon it, not much, only enough to suggest that hands not accustomed to using it had done so in haste. The black grit in the cavity, by contrast, was finer than soot and shimmered faintly. He touched it, rubbed it gently, and said nothing. The hall cabinet opened without difficulty. It was a narrow mahogany case glazed in front, and inside upon green baize the old Lighthouse journal had lain all afternoon like some pious relic. There were no scratches, no bent metal, no sign of forcing. Whoever had taken the book had used the proper method. Yet Mrs. Weatherby, affronted in her housekeeping conscience, swore that when she went to fetch fresh hot water 10 minutes before tea the cabinet had still contained the journal. "Who passed through the hall after that?" asked Kell. "Everybody, it seemed, and nobody." Felix had gone to find cigarettes. Hugh Denham had come in from the terrace. Lucy had crossed to fetch a music folio. Clara had taken a note to the study. Dr. Ware had looked for his gloves. Lady Sylvia had gone, she said, to ask whether the lamps were to be lit early because the weather was closing. Each account possessed the infuriating truthfulness of a half-hour in a country house. "Except Sir Reginald," said Poirot. "He remained in the drawing-room?" "Yes," said Lucy. "Until Mrs. Weatherby spoke." Poirot's eyes rested on her. "Mademoiselle, when your father said he would settle the matter himself, were you surprised?" She looked away. "No. He likes settling everything himself." "That is not an answer." A faint color came into her cheeks. "Then yes. Because I thought he seemed, not frightened exactly. More decided than usual. As if something had already been decided for him." It was an odd phrase from a girl who had spoken little since the death. Poirot stored it away. They returned to the library. Kell sorted the old letters from the drawer, the check stubs, the desk diary, the envelopes in the rack. Nothing there told its story. In the journal itself the missing leaf had been torn from the entries for October, 23 years earlier, the very month in which Hugh Denham's father had recorded the great equinoctial storm that still survived in village memory. The remaining pages spoke of lamp oil, sea frets, fog bells, a fishing smack overdue, one pane cracked in the gallery, and on the evening before the gap an entry in a firmer hand than the rest. Sir R.F. called at 8:40. Disturbed. Requested privacy. Hugh Denham bent over the page. "My father never wrote of callers unless they affected the light." "Then Sir Reginald affected it?" asked Kell. "Or wished to?" The answer was respectful, but there was an old bitterness in it. Poirot saw Sir Reginald's dead authority still operating from the floor where he lay hidden behind the screen. Dr. Ware said, "I remember that storm. Everyone for miles remembers it." "You were here then?" Poirot asked. "I was a young assistant in Penzance. I came over the next day." Sir Reginald's first wife was taken ill after the fright. Lucy lifted her head quickly. My mother? Ware corrected himself. Your mother had always been delicate. The phrase was harmless, yet it produced in Lady Sylvia a strange little stillness, as though some private chord had vibrated. Poirot reflected that second wives hear much history but are not supposed to interpret it. While the inspector questioned servants in the hall, Clara Blythe remained by the desk, one hand upon the chair back. Poirot approached her with the discretion he reserved for women whose self-command is almost a form of poverty. You are troubled, mademoiselle. I should be monstrous if I were not. Yes. But not for the obvious reason. Her mouth trembled and recovered. Sir Reginald was not loved, Monsieur Poirot. People complied with him. It is different. I have worked here 6 years. One becomes used to injustice in small administrative doses. And yet murder is a worse vulgarity than tyranny. It was excellently said, and because it was excellently said it was probably true. But Poirot noticed that she kept glancing at Felix Trent as though his ruin, rather than Sir Reginald's death, stood nearest to her imagination. Lucy, meanwhile, had gone to the window, where Hugh joined her. They did not touch. They scarcely even looked at one another. But between them there existed that grave, young, desperate understanding which advertises itself more plainly in restraint than in any embrace. Felix, seeing it, smiled with faint contempt. Immediately afterward he asked Inspector Kell whether he might have a whiskey. The request was reasonable. The timing was not. Poirot moved again toward the mantel. The silver lighthouse stood straight now because Kell had unconsciously corrected it while opening the base. But on the marble just beneath it there remained a crescent of disturbed dust where the object had very recently been turned and set back awry. That little pale mark, no wider than a fingernail, offended the room even more than the crookedness had done. Order restored after disorder can reveal the disorder more cruelly than before. Kell came back. I've sent men to search every bedroom and cupboard. Also the grounds. Search, said Poirot softly, for a sheet of old paper, perhaps folded. But also search for something less obvious, an intention formed before tea. Sir Reginald did not merely happen to die today. He was killed at the precise instant when this journal ceased to be antiquarian. The inspector nodded. And what do you suggest next? Poirot looked at the torn place in the book, and then at Hugh Denham. I suggest, he said, that we go where the book began, up to St. Aldhelm's Lighthouse. The dead keeper may still have arranged his truth better than the living. Section 3 has ended. Hugh Denham answered not with words but by taking the journal from Inspector Kell and moving toward the door, as if the natural obedience due to truth outweighed that due to police procedure. Kell frowned, then let him go ahead under guard. The little procession crossed the hall and went out upon the gravel before the house. Evening had drawn a veil across the bay, though not yet darkness. St. Aldhelm's Lighthouse stood on its low black headland beyond the formal gardens, its white tower ascetic against a sky the color of tarnished silver. The path to it wound between wind-bent tamarisks, and a strip of coarse grass where the sea, in rough weather, flung salt high enough to burn the roses. Lucy walked beside Sylvia without speaking. It was not filial dependence. Rather it was the instinct of one creature keeping near another in danger. Felix came after them with the look of a man who would have preferred to be anywhere else, and knew that preference itself might be interpreted. Clara Blythe followed the inspector. Dr. Ware, hands behind his back, moved with a doctor's infuriating air of belonging wherever misfortune occurred. Inside the Lighthouse Museum the air smelled of iron, old varnish, and a long-retained memory of oil. Hugh lit the wall lamps. Their yellow light fell upon polished lenses, signal charts, brass speaking tubes, and the plain desk at which his father, Jonas Pellow, had written so many nights into that crabbed ledger. Nothing was grand, yet everything carried the pathos of duty repeated beyond witness. My father kept duplicates of all formal entries after 1900, Hugh said. If the missing page matters, it may exist in another form. Did Sir Reginald know that? Asked Poirot. A pause. I do not think so. That is not the same as no. Hugh set his jaw. No. It is not. The inspector began opening drawers. Clara Blythe moved to a shelf of bound papers and sorted them with the quick accuracy of habit. Poirot, meanwhile, examined the journal entries on either side of the torn leaf. The missing date range covered 3 nights only. On the verso preceding it there was an impression, faint but undeniable, where something folded had rested between the pages for years. One corner mark, triangular and deeper than the rest, suggested an enclosed note rather than an entire sheet. A hidden paper, then, tucked into the log and removed when the book changed hands. Look here, said Kell. He had found a duplicate weather register, thinner and drier in tone than the private journal. It recorded wind, tide, lamp maintenance, and one notation on the critical date, 9:10 p.m. Gentleman from Beacon House insisted on access to upper gallery. Mr. Pellow objected. No name. Your father never wrote names in this copy, Hugh said. Poirot looked up. But the private journal did. Sir R.F. called at 8:40. Disturbed. Requested privacy. Yes. Hugh spoke carefully. He wrote names there only when feeling ran high. Against Sir Reginald? Against interference. It was an answer that concealed as much as it yielded. Poirot observed that Lucy had turned quite pale. She stood before the great Fresnel lens, and the prismatic glass broke her face into shifting planes like a truth viewed through convention. Dr. Ware examined a framed photograph of the old keeper. Pellow was a stubborn fellow. He and Sir Reginald never agreed. Yet the journal was entrusted to Sir Reginald, said Poirot. Because Hugh had no means to preserve it properly, said Felix too promptly. One cannot expect sentiment to master damp. Hugh's head came round. My father entrusted it because Sir Reginald asked for it 3 weeks ago and said a foreign family matter required discretion. This altered the atmosphere at once. Lucy stared at her father's solicitously cousin as though he had changed shape. Clara ceased sorting papers. Even Sylvia's composure suffered the smallest fissure. A family matter? Repeated Kell. Hugh nodded. My father was ill. He sent for me afterward and told me only this. If Sir Reginald wished the old October pages, he was not to have them without witness. Father died before I could ask why. Poirot let the words rest. Dead men become more truthful when others begin to fear them, Lucy said suddenly. Then why give the journal at all? Hugh turned to her, and for the first time the restraint between them failed. Because your father insisted, and because mine had spent his life taking orders from Beacon House even when he despised them. The room held stillness after that, not embarrassment exactly, but the shock of class feeling spoken aloud. Dr. Ware coughed. Felix examined his cuff. Sylvia looked at Lucy, and in that glance there was not social anxiety but pain. Poirot walked slowly round the central column of the lamp apparatus. Halfway round, beneath a rack of old signal flags, he saw upon a narrow side table a polished brass compass in its box. The needle pointed due north. Beside it, carefully aligned by some former habit, lay a row of glass slides used for lantern maintenance. One of them had shifted a fraction apart from the others, making a pale discontinuity in the line. The little disorder, trivial and exact, had the same irritating quality as the crooked silver lighthouse upon the mantel at Beacon House. Some minds leave signatures not in handwriting but in the irritation they cause when pattern is broken. Clara Blythe had found a packet tied in sail thread. Inside were 3 letters, all unsent drafts in Jonas Pellow's hand, evidently composed years earlier and never posted. They complained of Sir Reginald's fine lady business, referred bitterly to Madam's trouble in October, and once to the child as ought not to pay for the sins of quality folk. Inspector Kell read the line twice. What child? No one answered. Lucy was staring at the paper as though it burned her eyes. Felix said, after a moment, a village gossiping flourish, nothing more. Perhaps, said Poirot. But village men do not usually draft moral reflections unless they carry a burden. Then he lifted the last folded draft and found, tucked inside it, only a strip torn from some older page. Upon it, in a woman's sloping hand faded almost brown with age, were the words, "If he learns the truth, Lucy." Nothing more remained. The color drained from Sylvia Farn's face so completely that for an instant she seemed older by 20 years. Poirot saw it, so did Clara, so did Hugh, and so, with a daughter's blind terror, did Lucy. Inspector Kell drew a long breath. Now we begin, he said. Section 4 has ended. Now we begin, repeated Lucy, and the words came from her almost inaudibly, as though she had heard them uttered somewhere within herself before the inspector spoke. She swayed, and Sylvia put an arm about her with a movement so swift, so instinctive, that for one instant all artifice fell away. Whatever else Lady Sylvia Farn might be, her protectiveness of the girl was real. It was also disproportionate. Poirot, who trusted disproportion more than speeches, took note of it. I shall take Miss Farn back to the house, Sylvia said. No, said Lucy, recovering with visible effort. Please, no. If that fragment concerns me, I would rather hear the worst than have it whispered in corners. Felix muttered, Brave child. She turned on him with a steadiness that surprised them all. Do not call me a child when no one else is being spared. It was the first wholly adult thing she had said that evening. Hugh Denham looked at her then not with admiration, but with grief. Inspector Kell unfolded the scrap again. If he learns the truth, Lucy. That suggests a warning, or a plea. Or melodrama, said Dr. Ware. Old domestic confusions grow purple in retrospect. Poirot turned. Yet you are anxious they should remain confusions, Doctor. Ware smiled. I dislike villagers' relics inflated into legal documents. Legal? Asked Kell quickly. Ware gave the slightest shrug. Sir Reginald was a man of settlements, inheritances, memoranda. If he meant to speak, it was unlikely to be poetry. That was sound enough. Yet there was in it a misleading certainty, a professional man's attempt to keep the possible within named categories. Poirot mistrusted the intelligence that narrowed too neatly. Back at Beacon House the library had acquired that terrible domestic dignity which houses assume when the police are in them. Lamps were lit, servants moved in whispers, doors stood open because secrecy had become useless. Sir Reginald had been removed upstairs, and the vacant place behind the screen was in some ways more disturbing than the body had been. The dead, once absent, begin to govern by omission. Kell requested that each person write an account of movements in the quarter hour before the murder. Clara fetched paper. Felix asked again for whiskey and was refused. Lucy stood at the writing table and stared down, not writing at all. He remained a little apart from the others, his expression locked. Sylvia sat straight-backed, hands folded, as though awaiting a social ordeal rather than a criminal inquiry. Poirot, moving behind them, saw that Clara's account was brief, exact, and curiously impersonal. She mentioned taking a note to the study but omitted that she had also passed through the hall twice. Felix's sheet began with a joke and ended with an admission of debt. Lucy's page contained 2 crossings out so violent that the paper nearly tore. He wrote slowly, pressing hard. Sylvia did not begin for a full minute. When at last she wrote very little. "That is not enough," said Kell. "It is all I saw. Madam, you told Monsieur Poirot that Sir Reginald carried something metallic." "Yes. Yet you do not mention it." She lifted her eyes. "Because when I came to write it down, I ceased to be sure. Uncertainty on paper becomes falsehood." It was an admirable answer. Poirot watched her closely. One may tell the truth for moral reasons, or for tactical ones. The tone differs by a hair's breadth. The inspector took them one by one into the morning room. Felix went first and returned 10 minutes later with a face deliberately insolent. Lucy was called next. As the door closed behind her, Hugh Denham took a step forward and then mastered himself. Clara saw the movement. Her mouth softened, and a private sadness entered it, quickly gone. It occurred to Poirot that this house contained at least 3 loves, and that none of them promised happiness. At the center of the library, under the lamp, lay the journal. Poirot opened it again to the torn place. On the page following the gap there was a small stain, brownish and circular, no bigger than the head of a pin. Not blood. He bent nearer. Wax, perhaps, or a droplet from a sealing stick long ago. Such a mark would mean nothing to most eyes. To Poirot it meant that whatever had been inserted there had once been closed or fastened. He straightened and let his gaze travel, not to the desk this time, but to the mantel. The silver lighthouse had resumed its accusing existence at the center of the marble shelf. Around it the ornaments kept the rigid symmetry Sir Reginald loved, 2 black basalt seals at the ends, a clock in the middle, the model between clock and photograph frame. Yet the photograph frame itself stood a breath too near the clock, as though some hand earlier in the evening had shifted more than one object and restored only part of the original design. Disorder spreads in rings. Lucy came back from the morning room and stood very still. Poirot saw at once that the emotional blow had not been the inspector's questioning. It was the return to the library, to the place of her father's death, and to the possibility that his last intention had concerned her birth, her name, her right to exist where she stood. She went to the fireplace, and after a moment said, without looking at anyone, "He had been different all week. Not kinder. Only more exact. As if he were arranging his mind before breaking something." "Did he say what?" Poirot asked. She shook her head. "No. But yesterday he asked whether I believed character could be inherited. That is not a question fathers ask daughters unless they mean harm." The room absorbed that sentence. Hugh turned away to the window. Felix lit a cigarette with fingers not quite steady. Clara, in the act of gathering used sheets of paper, stopped abruptly. Then a smell came faintly through the air, a scorched, papery smell, slight but distinct. Mrs. Weatherby cried out from the passage. "The small sitting-room fire, sir! Someone has stuffed something into it." Kell was first to the door, Poirot next. In the little room beyond, where a coal fire had been laid against damp, a single folded paper had blackened and curled between the bars before wholly taking flame. Poirot seized the tongs, drew it out, and struck at the embers with impatient precision. The paper was ruined except for one edge. Upon that edge, in faded brown ink, 3 words remained visible. "My child must." Section 5 has ended. "My child must." Poirot read the words aloud, and because they were so few they seemed more intimate than a page. Inspector Kell took the charred fragment from him with care. The paper was old, cream-laid, and had once been folded into quarters. Along one side remained the ghost of a seal, long broken. Whatever had been fed to the flames in panic belonged not to the present generation but to the past, and yet the fear that consumed it had been entirely modern. "Who lit this fire?" Kell demanded. Mrs. Weatherby answered from the threshold, scandalized by crime and fuel misuse in equal measure. "I had coals laid an hour ago, sir, but no papers save the kindling already under them." "Then someone came here within the last few minutes," said Poirot. Felix spread his hands. "We were all in the library." "Not all," said Clara quietly. "I went to fetch fresh paper from the sideboard cupboard. Dr. Ware was speaking to the constable in the hall. Lady Sylvia had taken Lucy a glass of water. Dr. Ware said sharply, "For heaven's sake, Miss Blythe, if we enumerate every harmless movement." "Harmless?" Poirot repeated. The doctor's color rose. "You know what I mean?" "Yes." "I wish to know also why you are so certain of it." Kell turned to Sylvia. "You took Miss Fawn water?" She inclined her head. "In the dining room. Lucy felt faint." "And after?" "I brought the glass back myself." "Through the small sitting room?" "No." The answer came a fraction too quickly. Poirot did not challenge it. Denial, when touched too soon, often retreats into better fortifications. The fragment was carried to the library and laid upon a clean envelope. The words "my child must" lay in the center of the table like an accusation without grammar. Lucy stared at them until Hugh Denham gently turned her away. "Do not," he murmured. It was the first tenderness that had passed openly between them. Instantly Felix looked up with bright suspicion, as though affection itself were evidence. Clara saw his expression and lowered her eyes. If compassion can be silent, jealousy is even more so. Poirot asked for Sir Reginald's will. Miss Blythe fetched it from the safe in his study. The existing settlement was brutally simple: Beacon House and the larger part of the estate to Lucy, certain investments to Sylvia for life, annuities to servants, a far smaller sum to Felix, contingent upon freedom from debt. If Lucy were proved not to be Sir Reginald's lawful child, the entire disposition would collapse into a previous entail, and greatly favor the nephew. Felix whistled under his breath. "How efficient of the dead to improve my prospects!" "You would do better not to say such things," said Hugh. "Would I? Since every solemn face in the room is thinking them." This was not quite true. Lucy was thinking only of the words on the burnt fragment. Sylvia was thinking, Poirot believed, of consequences beyond money. Dr. Ware was thinking how to contain the spread of scandal. Clara was thinking of Felix, and hating herself for it. Kell tapped the torn place in the journal. "So the missing insert may have affected inheritance." That gives us motive enough for several people. Motive, said Poirot, is not a ledger entry. It changes weight according to the soul carrying it. He requested writing samples from everyone, not because he expected the old letter to be imitated but because the request itself unsettled people in revealing ways. Felix mocked the exercise and then formed each capital with exaggerated neatness. He wrote like a man cutting rope. Clara's hand was minute, disciplined, and elegant. Dr. Ware's sloped professionally across the page. Lucy's pen shook once and steadied. Sylvia wrote with beautiful calm, though on the final line the downstroke of her Y splintered very slightly, as if emotion had entered through the hand despite all barriers. Afterward Poirot wandered to the mantel again. The silver lighthouse stood in its corrected line between the clock and photograph, but now he did not look at the object itself. He looked at the finger smudges newly visible upon the polished black base where Inspector Kell had handled it, and where, beneath one of the fresh marks, a trace of older powder clung in the screw groove. Not dust. Not soot. Graphite perhaps, or the rubbed residue of a lead pencil. He turned to Clara. Sir Reginald kept pencils sharpened how? She blinked. To a needle point. Always by knife, never by machine. And who sharpened them? I did usually. Poirot nodded. The answer satisfied one small curiosity and awakened another. There came then from outside the crunch of wheels on gravel. The inspector's men had returned from searching the grounds. They brought nothing except the statement that footprints near the terrace were useless in the evening damp, and one additional fact: the side door from the rose garden to the hall had been found on the latch. Mrs. Weatherby protested. It is never left so before dinner. Could someone have entered from the garden? Asked Kell. Felix seized on it at once. At last, an invisible assassin. Very convenient. No, said Poirot. Not convenient. Prepared. He went to the side door himself. Beyond it the path ran between clipped yews to the library window. The sea beyond had darkened to slate. On the sill lay nothing, but in the groove of the latch there remained a minute thread, a fibre of pale blue silk, no more than half an inch long. Lady Sylvia wore blue. It was not enough. It was almost too much, for clues that arrive wearing labels are often invitations to stupidity. Yet the inspector saw it and looked, despite himself, toward her. Sylvia met his gaze with perfect steadiness. You cannot imagine, Inspector, how many garments in this house contain blue thread. No, said Poirot pleasantly. But I can imagine how many people, finding such a clue, would wish it found. Her eyes widened only a little. The smallest reactions are sometimes the loudest. Then, before anyone could speak again, the telephone in the hall began to ring, shrill and absurd in the thickening atmosphere. Clara went to answer it. They heard her voice, low and controlled, then a silence, then, very distinctly, No, you cannot speak to Sir Reginald. He is dead. When she came back, the paper in her hand was trembling. It was Mr. Lorimer, she said. Sir Reginald's London solicitor. He says a second packet was posted this morning and must be opened tonight. Section 6 has ended. A second packet? Inspector Kell held out his hand at once. Clara gave him the message slip. Mr. Lorimer said Sir Reginald had written instructing that if anything happened to him before midnight, the packet was to be delivered by special messenger from Penzance. It should already be on the road. Felix let out a short breath. My uncle contrived to be posthumously unpleasant. No, said Poirot. Precaution is not unpleasantness. It is only dangerous to those who have built hopes upon concealment. The words settled upon the group with different weights. Lucy pressed her hands together tightly. Hugh Denham went very still. Sylvia did not alter her posture, but the life seemed to retreat inward from her face as a tide withdraws from flat sand. Dr. Ware turned away to the window and began, with ostentatious calm, to examine the dark garden. They waited in that suspended fashion known only to households where death and revelation keep the same appointment. Kells sent for coffee. Nobody wanted it. Everybody drank it when it came, because cups offer the hands employment and the illusion of normal time. Poirot, accepting his with gratitude, watched rather than listened to the trivial words that followed. Under strain, people often talk not to communicate but to maintain the fiction that they still inhabit society. Felix spoke most. He joked at the weather, at the constable's boots, even at the coffee's strength. Each jest fell slightly aside, too eager, too polished. Clara answered him once or twice, not because she found him amusing but because she feared silence would expose him. That fear, in its way, was more compromising than any confession. Lucy sat beside the lamp and did not drink at all. Poirot saw that she was no longer frightened chiefly of scandal. She was frightened of knowledge. Youth will bear humiliation more readily than it bears redefinition. If the dead can alter the living by a sentence written long before, then identity itself becomes conditional. When the messenger at last arrived, rain had begun, fine rain, almost invisible, widening the panes. The packet was registered, sealed in red wax, and addressed in Lorimer's hand to Sir Reginald Farn, to be opened privately. Kell broke it in the presence of them all. Inside was an envelope and a short note from the London solicitor. The note stated that Sir Reginald had consulted him that morning regarding a matter touching the descent of Beacon House, and had sent for review a letter found hidden in the St. Aldhelm journal. As Sir Reginald feared family disturbance, he requested a copy be retained in London pending his final instructions. Kell opened the enclosed copy. It was handwritten, but marked at top in Lorimer's clerk's pencil, transcript of original. He read silently first, then aloud at Poirot's request. The letter, dated October 14th, 23 years earlier, ran from Eleanor Farn to Jonas Pellow, keeper of St. Aldhelm. It begged him to preserve her secret if pity remained in him. Her husband, she wrote, must never know that the child he believed his own had been born of my great sin before reconciliation was possible. Should he ever learn it, Lucy will be cast out not for her fault but mine. She added that Sir Reginald's pride would prefer extinction to disgrace, and implored Pellow to keep both journal and letter until a kinder generation may judge me. There was more, much more about guilt, loneliness, and the injustice of respectable marriage, but those first lines were enough. Lucy had gone white to the lips. Hugh moved toward her. Sylvia spoke first. No. It was a quiet word, but it carried command, protest, and something maternal, almost animal in force. Lucy looked at her, bewildered. Inspector Kell folded the copy deliberately. Then Sir Reginald had reason to think Miss Farn not his lawful child. Felix said very softly now. Good God! There was no triumph in him. Only shock, and underneath it, something meaner awakening in spite of itself. Dr. Ware cleared his throat. This is a private family tragedy, not necessarily a motive for murder. Not necessarily, said Poirot. But when private tragedies govern property, names, marriages, expectations, they become excellent motives indeed. Lucy rose. I do not care for the property. I care that my father meant to read that aloud. No one contradicted her, because each of them knew it was true. Sir Reginald's cruelty had always worn the garments of principle. He would not have whispered, he would have pronounced. Hugh said hoarsely, Lucy, come away from them. Why? Because I may not belong here? It is because you are hurt. The naked simplicity of it cut through the room. Lucy shut her eyes. Poirot saw in Hugh Denham neither calculation nor opportunity. Whatever his father had known, the son's concern was immediate and human. That fact shifted one line of suspicion decisively. At the far end of the room, the silver lighthouse on the mantel gathered rain-muted reflections from the window. Its straightened form should have looked innocent now. Instead, perhaps because of the letter just read, it seemed to Poirot a symbol of Sir Reginald's entire domestic creed. Even memory must stand square to the rule. Yet upon the ebony base there remained, just visible near the rear seam, a pinched scrap of wax no servant would have left. Old red wax, newly broken. A hiding place had served twice. He moved closer. Someone had concealed paper there recently, and removed it again, or meant to. Not the original letter, for Lorimer had its copy, but perhaps a fragment, perhaps something else. The discovery did not yet name the murderer. It did, however, narrow the murderer's method to someone who knew both the household ritual and the urgency of old paper. Felix, recovering his habitual edge, said, Well, Inspector, am I still your favorite? Or do we all now inherit suspicion equally? Kell ignored the flippancy. Miss Blythe, who knew Sir Reginald had sent that copy to London? No one, to my knowledge. Dr. Ware? No. Sylvia? She answered after the briefest pause. I knew only that he had written several letters this morning. About Lucy? I did not ask. That was the contradiction at the center of her. A woman whose whole soul had become protective, claiming not to have asked. Poirot did not expose it. Not yet. Instead he said mildly, Then we must suppose that the murderer acted before certainty, from fear of what might be said, not from legal knowledge complete in every detail. That is useful, because fear improvises. Improvisation leaves untidiness. He turned from the mantel. And untidiness, mes Amos, is now all over this very orderly house. Section 7 has ended. Untidiness, said Dr. Ware with a trace of impatience, is not a synonym for guilt. No, said Poirot. But it is frequently the trail guilt leaves while trying to imitate innocence. He suggested, with deceptive mildness, that he speak alone for a few minutes with each of them. Inspector Kell, after the brief internal struggle of an official man who recognizes an irregular but useful method, agreed. The first to enter the morning room with Poirot was Dr. Ware. He sat down heavily, crossed his legs, uncrossed them, and attempted the tone of professional cooperation. If this is about that old letter, I can tell you very little. I knew Lady Eleanor was unhappy. That was no mystery. Sir Reginald made unhappiness respectable. You attended her in her last illness? In her last confinement, and later in her decline. Poirot's eyes remained upon him. Then you know whether the dates accorded. Ware removed his spectacles and polished them with elaborate care. Doctors do not discuss family matters. Doctors discuss them when murder has occurred. The cloth stopped in his hand. Very well. The dates did not accord perfectly. I noticed it. I also noticed that Jonas Pellow noticed it. And I did what most men do in rich men's houses. I chose peace over truth. There was shame in the admission, and relief as well. Human beings cling to their old cowardices until larger disasters make them shabby even to themselves. Did Sir Reginald consult you this week? Poirot asked. No. He had ceased consulting anyone except lawyers. And Lady Sylvia? Ware hesitated. She asked once, years ago, whether women could love children not their own as fiercely as their own. I told her yes. It seemed an innocent question. Innocent questions, said Poirot, are often asked too late. When Ware left, Felix came in. He made cynicism do duty for nerves and failed at it. If you mean to accuse me, do it artistically, he said. I should dislike to be hanged on a commonplace motive. You would not be hanged, said Poirot dryly. And your motive is indeed commonplace. Debt, resentment, expectancy. That is why I distrust it. The common motive is too visible. It invites us to stop thinking. Felix stared at him. Beneath the wit and wastefulness was a wounded vanity not wholly contemptible. I wanted money, he said abruptly. I did not want blood. And if Lucy loses everything, I gain nothing worth keeping. This house would smell of it forever. For the first time Poirot believed him completely. Clara Blythe entered next and closed the door with precise fingers. You care for Mr. Trent, said Poirot. She looked straight at him. That is impertinent. Yes. But true. After a moment she said, I care that he has been stupid all his life because nobody required better of him. It is not the same thing. Perhaps not. Did you know Sir Reginald intended to expose Lucy's birth tonight? No. I knew only that he had found something in the journal and became almost cheerful in consequence. That frightened me more than anger would have. Why? Because he was never cheerful unless he believed himself morally armed. Her loyalty, Poirot saw, was not to the family but to justice as imagined by an efficient mind. Such minds can conceal facts, but they do not usually stab old men. The last interview was with Sylvia Farn. She came in composed, beautifully dressed in dark blue, her face luminous and fatigued. You have guessed what the letter meant to Lucy, said Poirot. I guessed long ago. The frankness of it did not surprise him, only the weariness did. How long ago? Years. Not from proof. From the shape of things. Sir Reginald's coldness to her was never a father's impatience. It was an injury he had not yet named. He waited, as he waited with everything, until naming it would hurt most. And you wished to prevent that? I wished, she said, that one human being in this house might be spared his principles. It was dangerous ground, yet she crossed it almost serenely. Poirot watched the discipline under the serenity and knew that she had either done nothing, or had done something for which she already accepted inward sentence. When she rose to go, a faint scent of iris and rain remained in the room. Not verbena. That eliminated one easy theory and made the harder one likelier. Back in the library, Poirot stood before the mantel while the household drifted uneasily toward dinner arrangements no one desired. The silver lighthouse shone under the lamps with stubborn polish. This time it was not crooked, not visibly tampered with, not dramatic at all. Yet the rear edge of the ebony base bore a minute crescent scratch, fresh enough to show pale against the black varnish. Someone, using a fingernail or thin blade in haste, had failed to fit the screw cleanly. The object had been opened by hands less practical than accustomed, not a servant's, not Hugh Denham's mechanical hands, not Clara's exact ones. Hands elegant, perhaps. Hands shaken by purpose. Then Lucy came softly into the room. She had not been summoned. Monsieur Poirot, she said, if what that letter says is true, I ought not to marry Hugh until everything is known. There it was, the moral instinct of the young, cruel to themselves because they believe truth must always be paid for at once. Poirot felt for her a grave kindness. Do you fear he will love you less? No. Her mouth trembled. I fear I shall feel smaller. Ah, said Poirot. That is the old poison, mademoiselle. Not sin, but shame inherited from other people's arrangements. She looked at him with wet, astonished eyes. Can one inherit shame? Yes. But one need not keep it. At that moment Inspector Kell returned from the servants' passage with a fresh piece of information. Ellen, the maid, had remembered seeing Lady Sylvia, just before tea, standing alone at the library mantel, as if she were setting something straight. Poirot lowered his eyes to the silver lighthouse and said only, Indeed. Section 8 has ended. Indeed, repeated Inspector Kell, who had not heard Poirot's earlier interviews and therefore valued Ellen's recollection as a fresh blow rather than a rung in a ladder already half climbed. He sent at once for the maid. Ellen arrived twisting her apron and confirmed, through much frightened apologizing, that Lady Sylvia had been in the library 5 minutes before tea. With her back to the room, ma'am, by the mantelpiece, and I thought she was putting the little lighthouse tidy because it looked not straight. Sylvia listened without protest. I was waiting for Reginald, she said. If the object was crooked, I may have touched it. May have? Kell repeated. I do not catalogue my gestures. No, said Poirot, but some gestures catalogue us. The inspector asked whether she knew the cabinet key was hidden in the model lighthouse. She looked at him for a single second too long. Yes, she said. I discovered it years ago. Who else knew? I cannot say. Clara spoke from the doorway. I knew. Mr. Denham may have guessed. Sir Reginald showed me once when he was displeased that Mrs. Weatherby had found the key in an ordinary drawer. Hugh said. I did not know. It was interesting. Clara had offered herself for suspicion at the very moment Sylvia might have borne it alone. A generous lie? Or merely conscientious correction? Poirot believed the latter. Conscientious people will incriminate themselves to keep facts exact. Kell's attention shifted. Dr. Ware, you knew the history of Miss Fawn's birth discrepancy. Why conceal that? Ware stiffened. Because 23 years ago I was not hired to perform moral surgery upon my patients. Lady Eleanor was ill, terrified, and married to a man who regarded tenderness as administrative weakness. If I kept silence, I do not repent it. No, said Poirot softly. You repent only continuing silent when silence became convenient. The doctor reddened, but said nothing more. Dinner was announced and refused by everyone except Poirot, who suggested that soup, if consumed without appetite, can still support justice. The servants, grateful for instruction, laid a diminished meal in the dining room. The family sat because refusing to sit together would itself have been a declaration. In such circumstances knives and spoons become social instruments of the first importance. Felix drank too much wine too quickly. Clara scarcely touched anything. He watched Lucy whenever he thought she would not see him. Dr. Ware ate with methodical inattention. Sylvia, astonishingly, preserved every small usage: bread broken, napkin folded once, glass moved by the stem, as though good breeding might hold back catastrophe. Poirot, observing her, understood more clearly than before that she had not been born to violence. If she had killed, she had crossed into murder not by temperament, but by decision. Halfway through the meal he said conversationally, "In these old houses one finds many kinds of inheritance. Money, furniture, names, habits. Shame also. Even hiding places." The spoon in Sylvia's hand struck the plate almost noiselessly, yet the minute failure of control was plain to him. Felix gave a short laugh. "An illegitimacy, apparently. We dine on a rich menu." Lucy rose at once. "No," said Sylvia. The words stopped her more effectively than if it had been shouted. Lucy sat down again, but color burned painfully in her face. It was then that Hugh Denham committed what looked like a blunder. "You need not endure this," he said to her across the table. Felix's eyes sharpened. "Need she not? Because your family has such a noble history with ours?" Hugh's hand closed upon his glass. "Say what you wish of me." "Gladly. Your father kept the journal. Your father withheld the truth. Your father may have blackmailed Sir Reginald for years. A very useful resentment to inherit." The accusation was ugly enough to persuade the room for one instant. It was the night's cleverest misdirection because it wore plausibility and class grievance together. He went white, and Poirot saw Lucy's loyalty leap toward him almost before thought. "My father never blackmailed anyone," Hugh said. "How do you know?" Felix retorted. "Because if he had, we should not have lived as we did." There was dignity in that, but also pain. Poverty speaks most convincingly when it is not being theatrical. Later, when they had gone back to the library, Poirot found upon the mantel one further small alteration. The silver lighthouse remained square, yet the photograph frame beside it now stood farther from the clock than before, as if someone, in passing, had corrected the wrong object at last. A person troubled by the idea of suspicion often tidies the evidence of suspicion, while forgetting that earlier untidiness has already been seen. He asked no question. He merely noted that Sylvia had entered the room alone a few minutes before the others. Inspector Kell came to him under pretext of examining the fire screen. "I could arrest Felix on motive and temper, or Sylvia on opportunity and that fibre, or Ware on old knowledge, or Denham on resentment. I dislike all four cases equally." "Excellent," said Poirot. "You are beginning to think. And you?" "I am nearly certain. But I need one more contradiction." As if the house itself had chosen to oblige, Clara Blythe approached them with a narrow leather memorandum book found behind the blotter. "This was caught in the desk rail," she said. "I believe it is Sir Reginald's private appointment diary." Upon the page for that day, in his precise hand, 2 entries appeared. At 4:30, Lorimer telephoned. At 5s, in library before tea. Show original if necessary. The inspector looked up sharply. "S?" Poirot closed the little book with one finger. "S," he said, "is sometimes the most dangerous letter in an alphabet. Section 9 has ended. S is sometimes the most dangerous letter in an alphabet," said Poirot, and slipped Sir Reginald's little diary into his pocket before anyone except Inspector Kell quite understood what had occurred. Kell followed him into the hall. "You cannot simply pocket evidence. My dear Inspector, I'd borrow it for 10 minutes and give you a murderer in exchange." There are occasions when confidence is the shortest road to official patience. Kell muttered but submitted. Poirot crossed to the morning room and rang for Clara Blythe. When she came, pale and composed, he opened the diary at 3 earlier pages. On one Sir Reginald had written F.T. re bonds, on another D.W. after luncheon, on a third J. Pellow deceased. Only the fresh entry remained a single letter. He abbreviated no one except the person whose name, in his own mind, required no definition, said Poirot. A wife, perhaps. A servant too familiar to the domestic code. But Sir Reginald did not think of servants as initials. Therefore S is Sylvia. Clara exhaled slowly. Yes. You knew? I suspected. He sent me away before tea and told Lady Sylvia he wished to speak to her privately in the library. She refused at first. Then she went in. Why conceal this? Because I had already given the inspector enough truth to hang half the house, and not enough to save the rest. That was honest, and more than honest. It was the exhaustion of a scrupulous woman who has served an unscrupulous order too long. From Hugh Denham Poirot obtained what he needed next. Jonas Pellow, before his death, had said once that Lady Sylvia had more mercy in her little finger than Beacon House in its foundations. Such village judgments, sentimental on the surface, often conceal exact observation. Hugh added one further detail. A week earlier he had seen Sylvia come out of the library with red eyes and Sir Reginald's voice behind her saying, "You will not prevent me." Poirot thanked him and at once returned to Kell. "Still circumstantial," said the inspector. "Of course. Murder by a lady in a good house is almost always circumstantial until one understands the psychology. Then the circumstances arrange themselves." He asked that no one retire, and that coffee be served again in the library. The request itself produced another ripple of strain. Sylvia accepted it with grave courtesy. Lucy did not sit but walked from window to hearth and back again with the restlessness of youth caged in revelation. Felix ceased joking altogether, which made him seem younger and more tolerable. Dr. Ware withdrew into professional silence. Clara took her place near the lamp like an efficient witness summoned by destiny rather than law. Poirot remained standing. He did not yet begin his final explanation. That would come when the minds before him had tightened 1 degree further. Instead he spoke lightly of old houses, of the way objects inherit secrets from their owners. Then he asked Mrs. Weatherby to bring the household inventory book. The housekeeper, astonished but obedient, produced it. Poirot turned pages until he found a neat entry made years earlier when Lady Sylvia married into the house. 1 lady's dressing case, blue morocco, 1 traveling desk, 1 ivory paper knife, 2 evening wraps, blue and gray. "What has that to do with anything?" asked Felix. "Perhaps nothing. Perhaps the color blue is very fashionable." Poirot smiled. "Or perhaps the fiber at the side door was not from a garden route at all, but from a wrap caught deliberately where it would be noticed." Inspector Kell frowned. "You mean the clue was planted?" "I mean it announced itself too willingly. Murderers who improvise and then regret often add a clumsy afterthought." Sylvia's eyes lifted to his. They were beautiful eyes, calm even now, but beneath the calm was not innocence. It was resignation waiting to be named. Poirot turned next to the small burnt fragment preserved on its envelope. "This was thrust into the fire after Mr. Lorimer's telephone call." "Why?" "Because until that call the murderer could hope the original letter was enough. After the call, it became clear that a copy existed elsewhere, and panic changed direction. The person who burned the original no longer burned to destroy all evidence. She burned to prevent one pair of eyes from reading one name or one sentence before the inevitable. Lucy stopped walking. One pair of eyes? Yes, mademoiselle. Yours. A silence fell so complete that the ticking of the clock seemed rude. Poirot went to the mantel. The silver lighthouse stood there once more, immaculate to every gaze except his own. He lifted it gently. See, he said, the screw thread is worn not by years but by 2 hasty openings today. First, before tea, when the cabinet key was taken. Second, after the murder, when the key, or something else, was thrust back in agitation. Sir Reginald, who would have noticed such crookedness instantly, left it crooked because he was dead. Ellen saw Lady Sylvia by the mantel just before tea. Sir Reginald's diary records S. in library before tea. Show original if necessary. He meant to confront her with the letter, perhaps to force her compliance, perhaps because he enjoyed forcing. Dr. Ware made an involuntary sound. It was not disagreement. Poirot set the model down. What happened next I cannot yet prove in every physical detail. But I know the shape. Lady Sylvia took the key, removed the journal from the hall cabinet, and found the letter. Whether she hoped to destroy it then or to bargain with Sir Reginald, he surprised or followed her. He had the paper knife at hand. He liked objects to remain in their place. He stood over the desk, the journal open, ready to speak tonight and ruin Lucy with the righteousness of an injured man. Lady Sylvia saw in one flash not scandal alone but a lifetime of cold punishment descending upon the child she had raised. She struck, not wildly, not repeatedly, but once. It was enough. Sylvia did not move. Poirot's voice softened. Afterward she tore out the letter, replaced the key badly in the lighthouse base, left the model crooked, and later, when the London copy was announced, tried to burn what remained. That is why the movements do not reconcile. They were not the movements of greed. They were the movements of desperate protection. He turned to Inspector Kell. Now, monsieur, assemble them all. The staircase is built. We have only to climb the last step. Section 10 has ended. Assemble them all, repeated Inspector Kell, and because the phrase carried the weight of an ending, no one resisted it. They gathered in the library under the moderated lamps while rain drew silver threads beyond the windows and the house settled into that profound unnatural quiet which follows the exhaustion of fear. Lucy stood beside Hugh Denham now, and no one told her not to. Felix remained near the hearth, hands thrust deep into his pockets, his usual flippancy dead at last. Clara Blythe sat upright in the chair nearest the desk, as if accuracy itself had taken a seat to witness. Dr. Ware stood by the bookcases, the face of a man who has come unwillingly to the bedside of an old moral illness. Lady Sylvia was the last to enter. She closed the door behind her with perfect gentleness. Poirot inclined his head. Merci. We will proceed, if you please, not by a leap but by the staircase. Each step is small. Together they arrive. He turned first to Felix. Monsieur Trent had the obvious motive, money. Therefore he was suspected at once. But obvious motives, when they belong to men who advertise them with jokes, are often a kind of alibi. He was too eager to look guilty in the familiar way. Also, had he killed for inheritance, he would have welcomed the London copy. Instead he feared it because he is not wholly bad and because he saw what it would do to Lucy. Felix looked down. It was perhaps the first charitable interpretation his life had ever received. Poirot faced Hugh. Monsieur Denham had resentment, yes. His father kept the journal, his family served this one, and old bitterness existed. But he loved Miss Farn. When the letter was read, he moved toward her not as a claimant toward advantage, but as a man toward pain. Such movements are difficult to counterfeit. Hugh flushed darkly and said nothing. Dr. Ware, Poirot continued, knew the ancient discrepancy and concealed it. That was cowardice. But it was the cowardice of 23 years, stale and habitual. Tonight's crime was not stale. It was immediate. It was done by someone for whom the blow fell not on memory but on the living future. Ware bowed his head. That is true. Poirot's gaze rested next on Clara Blythe. Mademoiselle had knowledge of keys, papers, habits. She also had the rigid conscience of the efficient. Such consciences may hide facts to preserve order, but they do not strike with a paper knife in passion. Their crime is omission. Clara accepted the verdict with a curious weariness, as though acquittal itself had exhausted her. Poirot moved to the mantel and laid a hand upon the silver lighthouse. Now we come to the object that has spoken all evening. At first it seemed merely a symbol of Sir Reginald, exact, polished, tyrannical in miniature. Then it became evidence. It was found askew in a room where nothing stood askew by chance. Why? Because its base had been opened in haste. Inside was the cabinet key. The person who opened it knew Sir Reginald's secret hiding place. That narrowed the circle. Ellen saw Lady Sylvia by this mantel before tea, setting something straight. Sir Reginald's diary records in library before tea. Show original if necessary. He had summoned her. He intended to show her the letter hidden in the journal, the letter that would publicly brand Lucy with her mother's shame. Lucy made a small movement. Sylvia did not look at her. Poirot went on, his voice gentle now. Lady Sylvia loved the child not because blood compelled it, but because kindness had. That is rarer and more dangerous. She had watched Sir Reginald prepare his revelation with that cold moral vanity which prefers justice to mercy because mercy does not flatter the ego. She understood exactly what he would do, not arrange quietly, not protect, but pronounce. To the proud, the exposure of others can feel like principle. To the loving, it is cruelty. A tremor crossed Sylvia's mouth and was mastered. The sequence is then simple. Before tea, Lady Sylvia came here. Sir Reginald showed her the original letter or told her enough of its contents. She took, or meant to take, the cabinet key from the lighthouse base, removed the journal from the hall case, and found the incriminating paper. Perhaps she hoped to destroy it and end the matter. But Sir Reginald followed, or summoned her back, and stood at this desk with the journal open, determined to speak that night. There was the paper knife. There was the unbearable future. She struck once. Inspector Kells said quietly, "And afterward?" "Afterward," said Poirot. She tore out the letter, thrust back the key, and left the lighthouse crooked. That is the concealed clue which the room offered us at once. Later, when Mr. Lorimer telephoned about the London copy, she realized the original was useless as a suppression. But it still contained one thing the copy could not spare Lucy from reading in public: the name of the man who had really fathered her. She burned what remained in the small sitting-room fire. Not to escape the law. By then that was impossible. She burned it for the girl. At last Sylvia lifted her eyes to his. "You do not know that." Poirot inclined his head. "No. But you do. And it is why you flinched not when the copy spoke of illegitimacy, but when it stopped short. The copy protected one intimacy by accident. The original did not. For a long moment nothing moved. Then Lucy said, in a voice scarcely audible, "Mother?" It was the wrong word in one sense, and the only possible one in another. Sylvia gave a broken little laugh that had no gaiety in it. "Oh, my dear, yes, if you like. For everything that mattered, yes." She looked not at the others but at Lucy. "Your mother wrote the name. I saw it. I knew what your father would do with it. Not only the estate. He would have told you before them all, as if humiliation were a disinfectant. I could not bear it. I thought only to take the letter. He came in. He said I had always spoiled you." Then he reached for the bell. Her hands, which had been so still, closed together convulsively. I took the knife. I did not even feel myself move. When it was done, he looked astonished, only astonished, as if kindness had broken a household rule. The confession hung in the room not like triumph, but like weather breaking. Dr. Ware covered his face. Clara began to cry noiselessly, not for Sir Reginald, perhaps not even for Sylvia, but for the whole long meanness of concealment, and class and obedience which had ripened into this single act. Felix stared into the fire with the expression of a man who has seen his own lifelong selfishness suddenly dwarfed by another person's desperate courage. Hugh put an arm about Lucy at last, openly, simply. She neither resisted nor leaned. She seemed beyond both gesture and shame. Inspector Kell stepped forward, grave and reluctant. Sylvia turned to him before he could speak. "I know," she said. "Please do not be ceremonious." Poirot looked once more at the silver lighthouse. It no longer represented Sir Reginald's order. It represented the fatal moment when mercy, denied lawful expression, had twisted into violence. A thing slightly out of line had told the whole story because human beings, in crisis, betrayed themselves precisely where they once served another's neatness. "There is always," he said after a little silence, "some small object in a room that waits to be understood. But the object alone is never enough. One must also understand the hunger, the pride, the tenderness, the humiliation. Murder is seldom born from one feeling. It comes from a crowd of them, pushing in the dark." He offered Lucy a slight bow, old-fashioned and infinitely delicate. "Mademoiselle, what was done before you were born is not your inheritance unless you choose it. Remember that." Then he turned to the inspector with his usual composure restored. "And now, my friend, you will do what is necessary." "I have finished." Section 11 has ended. The end.